A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I welcome you to another session of my course Globalization and Development. The topic of today's discussion is structures of global economy. In this lecture, we will cover the systematic evolution and development of global economy from the 19th century and from the 20th century to its present form. Before I discuss different institutions and structures of contemporary global economy, I would like to invite your attention to the historical context of current day, modern day globalization and modern day global economic system. As I have referred in my previous lectures and time and again I have discussed that there is a strong historical background to the present global interconnected and interdependent economic global system of the world. During the and it began during the 19th century, particularly during the 19th century from 1890s onward to the beginning and end of the First World War. If you go into the pages of the history, you will find that two things happened during this period. Number one, the rise and growing power and influence of the British Empire in Asia and Africa, Far East. They were successful in establishing large colonies being directly ruled by their representatives who were reporting to London and receiving orders from there. In India, in Africa, in South Africa, in Central Africa, East Africa and Far East, the British colonies became a very important part of the international economic activity of the United Kingdom. The second important event which took place during the First World War was the dissolution and dismemberment of the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire, you know, was an old political and economic entity, and which carried the economic and political and diplomatic cloud of say pre-modern eras from classical ages to the modern eras. Although its significance, political significance and other economic and cultural significance declined over a period of time, but still it was intact in one form and the other, and it went into an alliance with the Austro-Hungarian Empire during the First World War and fought against the Central Powers, that was against Britain and the French and their allies during the fought against the allies, and they were part of the Central Powers, the Austro-Hungarians and the Ottomans. They were fighting together. They were the Central Powers and they were fighting as allied forces. Somehow the Ottoman Empire was capitulated, and you know that with the capitulation of Ottoman Empire, the most of the North Africa and Egypt, the Middle Eastern countries, they were very cruelly divided and disintegrated by the British and French colonizers, French powers, particularly in the aftermath of the Treaty of Versailles and the Balfour Declaration. There was complete you can say balkanization of the Ottoman Empire. You can say all the western part of the empire, they seceded. Northern Africa, that was colonized, and the rest of Arabia and African parts were also colonized by the French and the British. My point is that the Ottomans provided some rules of the game during before the First World War, and during that period they were the important international trading power, along with the British, who rose during this period. But anyway, the British Empire, that overpowered along with the French, and they were able to dominate the world till the First World War. After the First World War, we find a changed world, a world which was rampant with the rise of the colonialism, British and the French colonialism, and the Western powers were directly, exploiting the resources of the colonies, and the exploitation of those colonies became the bedrock and the foundation of the international economic, trading and political activity of these powers. Colonialism became such an accepted norm in the West that a leading political economist and revolutionary, Karl Marx, even appreciated the power of British colonialism in British India, and justified that the occupation of India is justified by the British, because British are, they are driving forces of change, and they are bringing industrial and other, developments to this part of the world. Therefore, it is justified. And he ignored the exploitation and the manipulation of the local resources by the British colonizers. Anyway, beside that point, what is significant, that the foundations of the globalized economy were laid down during the late 19th and early 20th century, and it was during then followed by another, the struggle, the scramble for colonies, the struggle for occupying more and more land by the Western powers led to another war during the middle of the 20th century, from 1939 to 1945. If you look at the Second World War, the factors were political as well as economic. There was tug of war between the Western powers, particularly between Germany and the British Empire. Germans wanted more space, they wanted more land, and they were looking towards the east. They said that their claim to land and resources originated from the ideology of fascism, in which the Adolf Hitler argued that the Germans are the superior race, they are the Aryans, descendants of the Aryans, by virtue of their genealogy, they have the right to rule the world. Anyway, that provided the political conflict to the European scene, and that eventually the land grabbing and the search and quest and scramble for more colonies brought Germany and the British Empire and its allies to face, and the Second World War broke out. After the end of the Second World War, Second World War ended with the dropping of atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that dropping of bomb, brought new kind of diseases. Strontium element was released into the air for the first time, and for the first time, the world witnessed the increasing cases of blood cancers in the world. There used to be no blood cancer before the dropping of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You see, development, the more you develop, the more you progress technologically, the more sophisticated diseases, the more sophisticated problems are then innovated and created by the human beings through their genius. Well, having said that, I would like to invite you that it was in the aftermath of the Second World War that an agreement was arrived at between different nations of the world to make the world a rule based economic and political arena, and that was known as the Bretton Woods Agreement. Now, in the Bretton Woods Agreement, we see the emergence and the development of certain institutions which try to regulate and normalize the trade relationship between different nation states of the world. What happened that almost 40 plus nations, they gathered in Washington, which is known as the Washington Consensus, famous Washington, in which it was agreed that the value of the currency will be equated against a certain amount of gold. One ounce gold was standardized against the paper currency. Now, the most of the nations accepted dollar as a standard norm of global and international trading exchange, therefore, establishing their own currencies following that standard. Now, Bretton Woods, that provided the rule based international trading system, and different institutions appeared in the wake of the Bretton Woods agreement between the nation states. These institutions, included first of all the International Monetary Fund, which was the main, you can say, it established the main trading and economic mechanisms between the different nations, stabilization of the currency, more free market access to the trading goods, and regulating the trading behavior between sort of looking into the movement of the currency and capital across the world. But it was in the way IMF operates today is entirely different. It was sort of the preliminary of the modern day IMF. Then we find World Bank. The World Bank was concerned primarily with the infrastructure development of the developing and low income countries and middle income countries. It was focusing on the development of health, on the development of education, on the development of other roads, on the development of the construction of canals and dams. It was playing its role throughout the signatory countries of the Bretton Woods. Another important institution which emerged in the wake of Bretton Woods was the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff. So, it was the agreement evolved around came out of a protectionist view, which was premised on two theses. One, that national economies needed certain kind of protection, state economies. I mean, there should be a free economy, there should be an open economy, but it should be monitored by the political and the governmental regulations at the same time, so that it might not lead to hyperinflation and different kind of economic problems for the ordinary people. And secondly, the this GATT provided for the liberalization of trade between the nations. They sort of emphasize that more and more trade liberalization should take place, and more exports and imports from one part to another part should take place. But still it was a protectionist regime. And here comes an important development that from the United States of America, particularly from the University of Chicago, the Chicago School of Economics appeared, and led by leading economists such as George Cousineau and Milton Friedman, both Nobel laureates in economic sciences, and their students, an array of students, who molded and shaped the form of economic thought in the entire North America and Western Europe. Now, they are known as Chicago boys. They were, looking for a completely liberal economic model, not only in the US, but throughout the world. No, rather a neoliberal economy. Liberal economy, as laissez-faire economy, is referred usually to the founder of the modern economic wealth, the man who wrote The Wealth of Nation, the rise and the growth of the prosperity. Adam Smith. Adam Smith, he sort of was was the proponent of the idea of competition between the nations and a free flow of capital and goods between the nations. But at the same time, he realized that the nation states and the states of the in different parts of the world have not evolved and developed to a certain things. So, he proposed that those who are producing more goods, who are producing advanced goods, should take care of the countries who are less developed industrially, and should get imports. But it was an unequal relation all along. It has been an unequal relation between the Western countries, Western powers, Northwestern the Western powers, and the rest of the Asian and African powers, who were mainly agrarian. If you look at the period which I referred, the late 19th century from 1890 to 1914, and from there onwards 1914 to 1945, when the Bretton Woods agreement was signed between different nation states, you find that the most of the Asian and African countries are agrarian, agricultural based countries. And most of the country, they will produce cotton, they will produce wheat, they will produce rice, they will produce other vegetables, but they were unable to produce advanced industrial products, such as in Europe you find the development of advanced industrial plants, in which cloth, textile, development of textile industry, development of automobile industry, development of other machinery, advanced machinery, middle sized and advanced sized machinery in North America and in Western Europe. They were weaving clothes, they were making automobiles, they were developing plants, manufacturing plants, middle and large and huge manufacturing plants, So, that kind of industrial and technological advantage was lacking in the Asian and African countries. So, that should be kept in mind. It was in the wake of these conditions, different economic conditions prevailing in Asia and Africa, while different economic conditions prevailing in Western Europe and North America and Canada, and almost you can say the Caucasian countries, the white countries. They were industrially, they were technologically more advanced, more developed than rest of the world. So, they took advantage. It was their advantage was natural. So, get sort of try to regulate that advantage through certain protections and certain freedoms, which is known in the world as the Keynesian model. Keynesian, John Maynard Keynes, a famous British economist, he said certain protections are needed for the rational and systematic growth of economic systems, not only on the national level, but also on the international levels. Now, the Keynesian model was in force till 1971, 72, when the US President Richard Nixon, in a speech, just dished out the Bretton Woods agreement and the Bretton Woods standard of economic exchanges between economic system between the nations, and he fully endorsed dollar as the standard of international global economic system. Gold was replaced by the dollar, the paper currency, except the British pound, which was a currency which regulated. British pound was a gold standard currency, and it regulated the trade during the Bretton Woods and pre-Bretton Woods era. During the late 19th and the 20th century, it was the British pound which regulated the international trade, but after the scrapping of the Bretton Woods by the United States during the 70s, the standard of global trade became US dollar, and the nations were Now, the emergence of this global economic system, it has certain characteristics. It was asking for complete free markets. The idea of a Chicago School of Economics, which wanted a neoliberal economic system in the world. Neoliberal economic means a complete free market, where you have to compete on your own. Number two, IMF and the World Bank, they acquired greater significance and greater powers, and they were controlling and interfering into the national economies of Asian and African countries. What you see, you must have heard many times that the bailout package has been announced by the IMF to such and such country on the basis of such and such conditionalities. Conditionalities and structure, the concept of conditionalities and the structural adjustment. What is that? Structural adjustment and conditionality. Have you ever investigated that? That is simply the liberalization, the idea of making the national economy open to the Western goods, to the Western products, to the global economy. It is the liberalization, trade liberalization. It includes privatization of national and state assets, and it includes increased and speedy deregulation of assets and liquidities. The growing influence of stocks and stock exchanges, the growing influences of portfolio investment, the growing influence of foreign direct investment characterized the modern global economy. Now, IMF became a very important structure, backbone of the global economy, followed by the World Bank, and then followed by the evolution of change of the General Agreement of Trade and Tariff, which was a product of the Bretton Woods Agreement and which called for a liberal, semi-open, protectionist trading mechanisms between the nations that that evolved into World Trade Organization (WTO), which called for complete free market and which called for free trade between the nations, and the idea of preferential trading partners, most favored nation status, and idea of free trade agreements between different states. Although it is a rule based organization, idea, World Trade Organization, but at the same time it puts the less developed and the developing and the middle income countries in a disadvantage to the more developed, technologically, industrially more developed West and North America. And it has become abundant over a period of time. With every IMF intervention into the national economies, we see that the health and the stability of that economy decreases. Inflation increases, economic inequality increases, social inequality increases, social disorder increases, social disturbance increases. And we have seen bloody revolutions, conflicts in different parts of the Asian and African countries, in Latin American countries. We have yet to find a country, a nation state, which has benefited and recovered from the economic surgery, economic therapy of the IMF. Hardly. Maybe South Africa. I mean, look at Pakistan, and look at other countries of the world which have availed. Maybe Turkey has came out successfully from the IMF bailout packages, but Turkey has a different strategic and political location than Pakistan. Then we have I don't think there are other countries in Asia and Africa who have, in Latin America. Look at Argentina, it is totally debt ridden because of the 50 billion, it has just been given $50 billion bailout package, and still its currency, still its markets are, they are dead, cold, no economic activity, and they are asking for restructuring. Look at Greece, what happened to Greece? They call by giving the bailout to the national economy, they impose austerity measures. By imposing the austerity measure, they stifle the growth of the national economies, local economy. And what happens, that the local leadership has to open up their markets, has to open up their currencies, deregulate, make it a free exchange rate. No, as we have shifted to a complete free exchange rate, the rupee is at the mercy of the dollar. There is no regulation and control. Similarly, other countries who have benefited the IMF bailout packages. So, the extensive economic influence of IMF and World Bank. World Bank decides the development strategy of the developing and middle income countries. They seek out proposals, they seek out outlines from the local national nation states, and then they implement their own agendas. And if you look at the contribution of the World Bank throughout, particularly I would refer you to go to my research paper on the contextualizing poverty and culture towards the social economy of community based knowledge based development model, in which I have established beyond doubt that historically both IMF and World Bank has created an aid dependency, an economic dependency in the national economies of Asia and Africa. And instead of benefiting and instead of unleashing the indigenous economic potential of these parts of the world, they have stifled their growth. Particularly the agrarian economies of these regions have been devastated by the interventions, which were the main roots, which were the main resource of survival and growth in these parts of the world. The agrarian, even India has not been able to keep itself insulated and safe from the by liberalizing and by opening up their agriculture, although they have sought certain protections from the WTO, they have not been able to secure their agriculture and their agrarian base. Now, the Indian farmer is crying. In Pakistan, our agriculture is devastated because of the IMF and the World Bank interventions. In other parts of Africa, the agrarian base of the economy is shattered. And the dilemma, look at the, on the other hand, these nations, these Asian and African economies, they cannot develop and evolve as rapidly technologically and industrially as the Western and Now, the West and Africa and North America, they are not willing to transfer technology to these. That is another dilemma. They are not ready to transfer technology to these parts of the world. Instead, what happened? Now, I bring you to another aspect of global economy. After when the Bretton Woods era was ended and the WTO regime, particularly when the Soviet Union fell, dismembered, Communistas, they faced defeat at the hands of the United States of America, and in which Pakistan willingly or unwillingly played a role from 1979 to 1989, a crucial decade. If you look at the history of the world, it was a crucial decade. It was the same time the Chinese, they were granted the most favored nation state by the US. Now, there the another turn of the global economy took place. We were fighting the war, rightly we were fighting, but Americans have given a lot of aid, martial aid to Pakistan, and we developed and grew in education, in health. Pakistan was growing very rapidly till 1979, but then the priorities changed, and we were into a sort of strategic straitjacket, and we were serving the interest of the US, because we were bound to the investment, to the money and to the capital of IMF and to the projects of the World Bank. While China took the advantage, and it was during this period that Deng Xiaoping announced liberalization and opening up of the Chinese societies. And what happened? Look here, the Americans, they outsourced and they shifted their entire manufacturing and productive sector to the People's Republic of China. People's Republic of China. That productive and that manufacturing sector laid the foundation of modern Chinese miracle. China itself, if you look at China, before 19, it was primarily a socialist agrarian country, whose main economic strength came from the agriculture, paddy, wheat, this is all they were doing, and few industries. But the advanced middle range, advanced technologies, sophisticated technologies in IT, in computer manufacturing, in automobile, in other weapons development, etc., etc. They were all shifted and outsourced from the North America to the People's Republic of China. Now, this needs to be seen whether this was the correct American decision or not. History will judge it, but the Americans thought that China is a safe haven, it's a safe place. Our investment, our money will be safe and secure. We will continuously draw profits. So, from here, from the 1989 and 1990s, you see that Middle East and the adjoining countries, they become a perpetual scene of conflict and wars. They were practically invaded by the US. There was the first Iraq war, then there was the second Iraq war in 2003, there was the invasion of Afghanistan, then there was an invasion in Syria. The America was fighting wars in these part of the world, China growing with every day economically, based on the American technology, and they grew to such a level that they became the second largest economy as far as the GDP was concerned after the US. The US started feeling the pangs and the pains of this new global economic player. India, Mexico, Brazil, Pakistan, other Asian and African countries, they were no match. Japan was a close ally of US. US never felt threatened from Japan. European Union was a close ally of the North America. They never felt threatened. So, the global economic structure saw a new, it was a nexus of Americans and the Chinese. It was a marriage of, you can say, of profit making, cheap labor, Chinese providing the cheap labors to the North American investors, capitalists, and the American capitalists, they were making money day and night. But at the same time, the Chinese were developing technologies. They became stronger, and the time has reached by 2012 that the Chinese became a leading trading power of the world. They were manufacturing everything, low level, middle level, complex, high level, high tech manufacturing, and they were exporting it to the entire world. It was natural. Americans started feeling threatened, and there you see the trade wars, famous trade wars between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping of China. Americans imposing 500 billion tariff on the Chinese goods. In retaliation, China imposing billions of dollars in tariffs. So, you see, the global economy is basically a system of economic growth in which those who have the capital, those who have the money, they want this capital and money to move freely. Then another very pillar, the free movement of money and capital was ensured by the opening up of the stock exchanges of the world. Karachi Stock Exchange, Bombay Stock Exchange, Hong Kong, Hang Seng, the Tokyo Stock Exchange, the FTSE, the CAC, all they became interconnected. They became wired through internet, electronically connected, and they were, the capital started flowing with more than the speed of light, and the investors throughout the world. Now, you are not, if you have money, if you have capital, you are privileged wherever you are. Even if you are from a third world country, you have made money by one way or another, say by land grabbing, by smuggling, by illegal occupancies, by renting and profiteering. You have made money. You have shifted that money to the safe havens, tax havens of the Western economies, the islands, Panama, you see the Panama Leaks are a very famous example of that, tax havens. And you see that the rich people, the capitalists of Pakistan, capitalists of India, capitalists of Malaysia, Indonesia, and African capitalists, Latin American capitalists, American, it is a whole class, it is a global class. They control now the entire resources of the world, and they do not want any interference from the national governments. Now, the power of the nation state has eroded considerably in the post 1980 eras. It has continued from 2001 with the classic American invasion of Afghanistan. It has multiplied, it has rapidly multiplied, and we see weakling and struggling and begging nation states in the world. Now, what has happened that on the one hand, the free flow of money through the stock exchanges, the capital, it resides where it is secure, one, and it moves where it can multiply, two things, that is in the nature of the capital, in the nature of the. Then we see the rapid growth and rising expansion of the multinational corporation, another important structure of the global economy, global political economy, and that is the rising growth of national, multinational corporations and transnational corporations. Now, multinational corporations, there is a slight difference between them, but in their practices there is no, the multinational corporations, they might have their headquarters in North America and Western Europe, while they are doing businesses across the world, across the globe, without any restriction, without any boundaries and limits. Transnational companies, they go across the boundaries, they acquire assets, through mergers and acquisitions between the local businesses and the transnational companies. They expand the capitalists, they expand their influence, they expand their powers, and they expand their sphere of influence. So, in this way you can see that capitalism has taken on another form. It has become it has achieved certain attributes which are quite recognizable. It has become highly competitive, it has become very fluid and fluent. It does not obey any restriction and control, flows freely between different parts of the world through stock exchanges, through multinational companies. And these multinational companies are then supported by the economic surgery and economic therapy of the IMF. With every bailout package, the national economic sovereignty is eroded, it is ceded, it is gone, the currency weakens, devaluation increases, depreciation increases, inflation increases. Look at Pakistan, look at Kenya, look at Somalia, look at Ethiopia. Every country is asking for, look at Greece, every country is asking for the IMF bailout package, and with every bailout package they have to surrender their national assets. Privatization, privatize railway, privatize steel mill, and that is why certain Stiglitz, for example, Joseph Stiglitz, and certain other American economists, they have criticized. Noam Chomsky, they are critics of this global political economic system. It is exploitative, it is manipulative, it is, you can say, an Americanized global economy. America is the central player in this economy because American currency is the dominant, it is the standard economy, it is the standard unit of exchange in international trades and goods. Now, with outsourcing and with the transferring of technology to the peoples over there, the Americans focused on high tech, advanced technologies, space technologies, artificial intelligence, robotics, cybernetics. The West European countries, Germany, UK, they were focusing on more advanced, to take the lead, to create more and more innovative and more novel technological advances, to keep the rest of the world following them. So, I mean, where is the so-called myth of free market, free and fair market, open access to everyone? No, it cannot be. Capital cannot create a free and equal market. Capital will always create a dominated, controlled and unequal market, because those who have money, they belong to one class. No, it does not matter that you are a Muslim, you are an Arab, you are a Christian, you are an atheist, you are a Jew, you are a gay, you are a homosexual, whatever you are. You have money, you are part of that group, international global clique, elite. They buy assets across, they don't want any restrictions on their way. They buy assets, they buy money, they buy properties, and they multiply their capital. And finally, now I would like to invite your attention to the further transformation and changes into the global economic structures. Having discussed the role of IMF, of World Bank, of multinational corporations, transnational corporations, different types of investment, foreign direct investment, Greenland, there is a concept of Greenland investment, a complete new business is created by the investors. There is a portfolio investment. A portfolio is created by the foreign investors in the national and the local economies. Finally, I would like to bring your attention to the fact that can this economy sustain and continue growing? No, we are faced with a major threat to it, and that is the emergence of coronavirus from the very center of growth and development, that is People's Republic of China. How this virus came into existence, is it accidental, is it planned, that needs to be seen. You should investigate. You should also critically investigate. If it is a continuation of the trade war between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, is it some sort of a biological warfare unfolding between these two nations, and it is a grab and scramble and struggle for world domination, or it is just a disease, an accidental breakout of disease, and world needs a joint action and response to it. Even in this crisis, global crisis, we see hypocritic and selective statements of the WHO praising certain countries. I mean, nobody is safe, my dear friend, nobody is safe from this evil, this menace, and you are praising that this country, this particular country is good, it's very good, they are very efficient in managing COVID-19, and these you are unable to manage it. You cannot manage it, you cannot control COVID. When it enters, and then it goes on a journey of destruction and rampage. Look at Italy, look at France, look at Germany, look at the US, look at China itself, now India. There is no way you can stop it. All you can do is take care. All you can do is to stay out of touch, stay within your homes, because there is no cure, there is no vaccine, and I don't see developing a vaccine. I don't think. They failed in developing vaccine for the SARS-1, the classic SARS. There is a swine flu of the 2012, failed, but the disease subsided. The medical genius and the medical technology of the WHO and other giants in Western Europe and North America, they failed, and in China. And here comes another evil to the world, to the entire world, and through trade and change, because Chinese traveled. When this disease broke out in China, it was the responsibility of the Chinese government to put travel restrictions. Now, millions of Chinese, they moved out of China. to celebrate their lunar calendar, you know, in middle of the January. They moved out of Wuhan, Hubei province, and they were traveling to all parts of the world, and simply they took the disease with them, and now the world is in a mess. Everybody is in a mess. But my question, the question I want to leave here to all of you is it a self-invited? Is it an accidental menace, or is it a next stage, next form of war, trading war between the People's Republic of China and the US? I leave it up to you. Thank you very much for today's section. Take care, stay home, stay safe.